Okay, here's how we change degrees to radians and radians to degrees. What we want to do is we want to set up a proportion. So I'm going to, for an example of degrees to radians, I'm going to pick the angle measure 135. And so I need to set up a proportion with 135. And to do that, I need a measure of degrees and radians that is the same. So I'm going to use 180 and pi. Those are equal. They measure the same amount. So I'm going to take 135 out of 180. That's my degrees, is equal to a certain number of radians that I'm looking for over pi. So that's how you would set up a proportion, and that's where these formulas come from. And so here, I'm going to cross multiply with the pi, and I'm going to have 135 times pi over 180 equals my number of radians. And so if you look at this formula here, that's what you end up doing every time. You take the number of degrees, you're going to multiply it by pi, and then you're going to divide it by 180. So the only work you would need to do from here is to simplify your fraction. And I'm not going to do that right now because we got some examples on the next slide, and we can simplify fractions then. The radians to degrees formula is the same principle. It's just instead of cross-multiplying one way, by multiplying the pi by the number of degrees, you're going to cross multiply the other way and multiply 180 by the number of radians. So it's the number of radians times 180 divided by pi. Like it says here, and there's this typo that I still have not corrected on this slide. The way it always works is you cancel out the pi, and then you're going to be left with a fraction, which you will then multiply by 180. So cancel the pi, multiply it by 180. So here are a few examples. So if we want to convert degrees to radians, the way we said to do that is we multiply by pi, divide by 180. And then the only work we really need to do is to simplify that fraction. So these two numbers both divide by 15. That's their greatest common factor. And so I would get 5 pi over 180 divided by 15 is 12. So 5 pi over 12. So 220 degrees, I got 220, I multiply by pi, put it over 180. I simplify, both of those numbers divide by 20. So I end up with 11 pi over 9, or 11 ninths times pi. And so just to be clear, you could write this either way. And I don't really have a preference. You can do it however you feel comfortable. And then negative 54, negatives work the exact same way as positives do. We multiply by pi, we divide by 180, and we simplify. 54 and 180 can both be divided by 18. And if you don't notice that right away, you can divide them both by 2 or by 3 or something else, get smaller numbers, and then work it down from there. If I divide by 18, though, I get a 3 on top and a 10 on bottom. I still have my pi, so it's negative 3/10 pi. One thing to notice here is if you have a degree measure that is less than 180 or has an absolute value less than 180, you will end up with a proper fraction times pi. So like 5/12 and 3/10 are proper fractions. If you have a measure that has an absolute value of greater than 180, then the fraction that's with pi will be an improper fraction. So that can be a quick way to check your work on these. On this side, we have all proper fractions, so we would expect to get angle measurements that have a degree measure of less than 180 or an absolute value of less than 180. So let's go ahead and try these. So 7/9 pi, we are going to multiply that by 180 and divide it by pi. And what happens is we just end up canceling out the pi's, and then we have 7/9 times 180. And multiply the fractions as you would like. I like to put the 180 over 1 and then see if I can cross cancel anything. I'm going to divide these both by 9 and get 20 on top. So what I'll have here is 7 times 20 is going to be 140 over 1. So I have 140 degrees. So for the next two, I'm just going to skip that first step because I know pi cancels out. I'm going to be left with this fraction. So in this case, 11 over 18. And I'm going to multiply it by 180. I'll put that over 1. I'll do my cross canceling divide those both by 18 on this one, and I will get 10 on top. And I know I'm just going to have a 1 on bottom, so I don't really need to worry about that. I'm just going to take negative 11 times 10, and I will get negative 110 degrees. So same thing on the last one. I'm going to just forget about the pi because I know it cancels out. Take 3/5, multiply it by 180. Simplify here by cross-canceling. I'm going to get 36 up here. And then just multiply the 3 times the 36. And I'll have 108 degrees. So when you're going from degrees to radians, you set up a fraction with a pi on top, the 180 on the bottom, and then you just simplify the numbers as much as you can. When you're going from radians to degrees, the pi ends up canceling out, and you take whatever your fraction is that's left and multiply that by 180, and then simplify if you need to. So that is degrees to radians, radians to degrees.